Assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome to Muslims for Progressive Values and also Ramadan Mubarak. Today is a very special day. This is going to be our first live class on Muslims for Progressive Values progressive curriculum. So first of all, a big shout out to MPV, of course, and also a shout out to the A&A, the ANA Foundation, because they are the ones that helped to fund this program, the lessons that were put together. So shout out to them as well. So this curriculum can be found on the Muslims for Progressive Values website, but we're going to be going through just the first unit today, and that unit is called What is Islam? A lot of us probably already have like the basic histories or the basic idea of like what is Islam, but this isn't just going to go into those. It's also going to talk about sort of the progressive history of Islam, why Islam, became such a big deal as fast as it did, and kind of how it spread throughout the world, and also the diversity of Islam, because Islam and Muslims are not like a monolith. They're not the same everywhere you go, which is actually really awesome. So we're going to learn a little bit about that as well. All right, here we go, y'all. So as always, if you have questions, I'll get back to those. Just put them in the chat, and then I will let us know when it is time to talk about them. So why a progressive Islam curriculum for adults? The intro here. So MPV was founded in 2007, and it specifically was founded to share this progressive view of Islam, as well as to advocate for social justice, human rights, inclusion. It started in the United States, but it has spread globally. We have different chapters throughout the world, and we're also partnered with the UN as a nonprofit here to help with voting and having a voice in making sure that we maintain and try to advocate for the human rights in Islamic lands as well as around the world. And again, A&A Foundation was able to help us with the creation of this course. So let's get into that. The first lesson, first little section we're going to go over is pre-Islamic Arabia. So before we figure out about Islam, when it first started, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So the world was going on before Islam. So let's see sort of what was going on in Arabia during this time, right before Islam came to be there, right? So Arabia before Islam was referred to as the Jahiliyyah, which is going to be the ignorance. So this is often referred to as like the time of ignorance, right? Or the dark time of ignorance before that. It wasn't all polytheistic, though. There was some monotheism within the Arabian Peninsula at the time, specifically from Judaism, and a little bit of Christianity that would come through. During this time, there were multiple different religious groups. Obviously, like I said, the Arab polytheism, Judaism, but also the Manichaeism, Mazdakism, different forms of Christianity, and the Zoroastrianism, which is actually also brought up in the Quran as well. So the reason why there were so many different groups and people going on at the time during this time in this place is because it was sort of like this cross section between two bigger like empires here. So we have like the Roman Empire, and then you also have the Byzantine empires, and this was sort of like a trade route. Most of the people that lived within the Arabian Peninsula were actually travelers and traders. They're known as like the Bedouin people, and they're nomadic. So that means that they travel. They don't usually stay in just one spot. And that was mostly because this place here, the Arabian Peninsula, is very difficult to live in. It's a very harsh environment. So it's desert, rocks, very hot, right? And not as many places to take shade, to build. It's hard to build on sand, right? If you've ever gone out to like the US, like Southwest, I used to live out there in like Utah and Arizona. Even in like modern technology, like driving in a car, you'll go out there and you'll see a sign before you get into the desert, and it's like, I hope you're filled up on gas. Make sure you have water, because you're not going to run into another place for like another like hour and a half or something. And it's true. You'll just get out there and you're in the middle of the desert, right? So during this time when it takes, weeks and months to travel places, this part of the world was just sort of like a mix of everybody coming in and out. That's just there on those trade routes. But they didn't stay as long, right? Okay, and so unfortunately, because of that, people weren't really investing in that area as much. Some of the areas that sort of were popular, you have the Hejaz, the western portion of the Arabian Peninsula, that contained Mecca and Yathrib, which is now Medina. But how did it become like such a major Islamic, major religious and like conglomerate area, right? So according to Islamic history here, Mecca itself was actually founded by Hajar, who is the wife of the Prophet Ibrahim. So after Ishmael was born, according to the story, Prophet Ibrahim then takes his wife and his son out to the middle of the desert. And he's like, I am to leave you here, right? And she has a very human reaction. I do not have a PowerPoint. Thank you for pointing that out. I do not. Feel free to take notes. And this video will be going out for everybody to review it. You can also, there's a link that we shared at the very top of the chat that does have the link to the curriculum itself. You can pull that up and follow along. So there's the link there. But yeah, so he takes them out into the desert. And I really love these humanizing stories of the prophets. And this is one of those, right? Because at first she is very nervous about that. She's like, are you sure we should be doing this, right? And he was like, this was Allah's choice. This is what Allah told me to do. And she, being as, faithful and religious as she is, she says, okay, well, Allah would never lead us astray. So this is what we're going to do. So he leaves her and their son in the desert, right? And eventually they become very dehydrated, and she does start to panic because, again, she is a human and she's going to panic, right? So she gets very nervous, and she starts running back and forth between these two hills, desperately searching for water. She runs 7 times between the Sofa and Marwa hills. This is actually part of the Hajj later, right? And then after the 7th time, she sees and hears the voice of the angel Jibril. So the angel Jibril being the messenger of God, right? Also, big shout out to her, because we often hear about like the male prophets receiving these messages from angels. She did as well, which is really cool. So he shows up and he's like, we got you. Here's the water, right? Water gushes forth from the ground near Ishmael. And she panics and she's like, oh no, the water's going to run out. So she says, zum, zum. So like, stop, please stop. And it doesn't run out. So this is now known as the Well of Zamzam. This is like a sacred place. And this water source is actually what allows Mecca to be built and turned into like a major city, major trade area, because of this like almost never ending like well of water here. So it allowed all of the merchants to come through the desert and stay and actually finally sustain a large group of people. So this is really great. Then the Kaaba, which is that like black building that you see in Mecca, where the stone, the meteorite, there is stored. It's like the super sacred site here. It's at the center of the Masjid al-Haram. And it is said to be built by Ibrahim himself. At the beginning of the 5th century, the Quraysh established the rule over Mecca and sort of this whole surrounding settlement here. So that's in this century. Because of the Kaaba, there were pilgrims coming through this area. And although originally it was, monotheistic, it started to become a pilgrimage site for like all sorts of people. So the pagan Arabs also used this as a religious place. And this sort of just became like the center in this whole like Arabian Peninsula. All of the religious people come here as their place of worship for their pilgrimages. And you have so many people coming through now that all of the tribes and religious groups in the area were starting to gain all of this wealth. And so it continued the flow of pilgrims through Mecca, and that was sort of like what made Mecca this major power in the world, right? So from Ibrahim up to here, now we have one interesting thing about Mecca too, is that even before Islam, this area in general was actually considered like a pretty relatively peaceful place. They did have a lot of like social issues. There's like the super rich versus like the poor. They had a lot of those. But as far as like constant warring kinds of stuff, it wasn't as common right here within Mecca because it was considered this like sacred space for everybody. The Quraysh, which is the tribe that actually the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came from, ended up being one of the wealthier tribes in this area. According to the Islamic scholarship, before Islam, there were about 360 or so individual deities in the Kaaba. So that can tell you like how many types of people were showing up here. So building on to the economic success of the pilgrims, the Quraysh were able to become merchants and traders. So now they are going to be in charge of these trade routes of these merchants and these groups. They can have all these businesses that sell things, that are trading with each other, that are helping each other get the different groups out to the different sides of the world. So this really does become like that economic sort of powerhouse. However, there was a lot of income inequality, like I said. So you're going to have people that are super, super rich and people that are super, super poor here. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. But yeah, the invention of the camel caravans was said to have started with his great-grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad's great-grandfather. I apologize, guys. Ooh. So that starts with that history there. But even again with this inequality in the income, you did have tribes that were backing each other. So there started to become these like alliances within Mecca. During the time of the Prophet Muhammad, there were about 14 different tribes here that were all sort of sectioned out in their different parts of the city. Another important thing other than the income inequality here that was starting to cause these like social rifts is the fact that it was extremely patriarchal. I do find anytime I've like looked at and studied into ancient peoples, whenever they follow the male line, I find it really interesting because before DNA and everything, you always know exactly who the mother is, but you kind of have to go based on like what you're told as to who the father is. So I do think it's very interesting when they try to follow the male line as opposed to the female maternal line. But the people here within Mecca, the ancestral lineages of the clans are by male line. So there's a lot of like patriarchal, aggression type energy going on here as well that helped maintain the tribal orders. And so this made it a little complicated as they started to, Islam started to establish itself. Because there were actually sections within Islam, as we know, that were advocating for like women's rights, the rights of slaves, and things like that, which went against this sort of aggressive patriarchal structure that was going on there. So that leads us up here to lesson 2. So now that we have this like understanding of this like trade route area, the desert, and how Mecca was sort of established, now we can look at what happened after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born, right? So he was born in the year 570 CE. This was known as the year of the elephant because the Abyssinian king had tried to march on Mecca with his elephants. And it was like this big event that happened. So it was known that year as the year of the elephants. So 6 months prior to his birth, his father, who was out on trade routes and stuff, he ended up falling sick on a trip to Palestine, and he died. After his birth, in accordance with the Bedouin tradition, he was then sent to live in a settlement out in the desert to be cared for by a Bedouin family. It wasn't common for you to like stay like with in the home like with your parent, right? When you think of like, let's say like modern times, the idea of like sending your kids to like boarding schools or like to an area that's like safer if you don't live in like a safe area, right? Uh, the tradition here was that you would send them to this like settlement just for like raising kids. So he goes out there, and when he was 6 years old, his mother, Amina, actually passed away. So he was sent to live with his paternal grandfather. Uh, so that's Abd al-Muttalib, and he was the chieftain of the Banu Hashim clan. So he's already sort of like, oh, is that? Oh, okay. Sorry. Bye, Melissa. Just saw your message. Hope everything's okay. So he's sent to live with his paternal grandfather. And then 2 years later, after his death, Muhammad began living with his paternal uncle, Abu Talib. So you can see this like male line here, right? Where it's like after his father died, he ended up going with his grandfather, and then his uncle are all on his father's side, right? It's also important to note here that he had that's a very traumatic upbringing, right? Moving from one place to another, losing both of your parents, losing your grandparents, losing your, people in your life, becoming an orphan, and really just having to like go through that. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, really understood what it was like growing up and not feeling safe and secure, right? And feeling sort of lesser than, although he was part of one of the wealthier tribes here. He was losing all the people that were really close to him, and that can be very traumatic. So he ends up with his uncle Abu Talib. And let's see from there. So as a boy, he became immersed in that economic trade. So he started trading and working, when he was like young, like a teenager, early teens. He did really well at his job. He was great with trade. He was known as being very fair. And all of the accounts show him as being known as, quote, the trusted one. So he was known as being honest, hard worker, great worker. And because of this, one of the women who's a successful businesswoman in Mecca, Khadija, who ends up being his first wife, she heard about him. And here's another fun fact about early Islam. We often think of like the older men with like the younger wife. However, Khadija was like 40 and he was 25. So she was actually like almost twice his age, and she's the one that proposed to him. So I love that story because it kind of breaks some of those ideas that we have about sort of like traditional marriage. So in 610 is when he had it one evening during the month of Ramadan, which is why we're celebrating right now, Ramadan, which is great. He was meditating in a cave, and he did this all the time. He was known for going out to meditate for hours at a time. This is probably what helped him maintain that great mental health that he had even through all of these hard times. But while he was meditating in a cave one day, as we know, the angel Jibreel shows up and he commands him in this voice that says, recite, right? Recite, which is the Quran. It was the voice of the angel Jibreel. And the first verses were Surah Al-Alaq 1-4, which says, the English translation, in the name of Allah who created man from a clot. Read, and Allah is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. This story of the revelation of the Quran from the angel Jibreel is definitely one of my personal favorites about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because of his reaction. So many times in our lives, we think of like how can we be the most pious? How can we be the most like holy? And we think about, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, just like falling on his knees, the servant of God. And the truth is, everybody that recorded what happened to him, he got terrified. Like he was scared. He like runs down to the mountain, freaking out, and goes to talk to his wife. And he's like, I think I'm going crazy. I have to tell you what just happened. He was just unnerved. And I love that because that's a very human reaction to have, right? It's a reminder to us that, like, even the best of us, right, might struggle with our faith, might be nervous about taking these new steps, might be scared about are we being led on the right path? Is this really inspiration? And I really just love the humanity in that, right? So he returns to Khadija, and she consoled him and said, yes, this is definitely from God, but let's go talk to some of my cousin, some other people. Let's talk to my cousin, because he was an Arab who practiced monotheism. So they go talk to her cousin, and he was like, yes, he is definitely getting messages from God. So after that first revelation, though, the Prophet Muhammad did not hear anything else for about 3 years. So he knows that he heard this message from God, but then it just goes silent. So it's silent, and you don't hear anything for 3 years. He did continue to turn towards his spiritual development and devotion to prayer. And then in 613, the revelations did return, and that renewed his confidence. And he was able to start sharing these revelations with the people that were closest to him. He didn't immediately start going out and trying to share it with everybody in the world, but he did share it with the people in his family, his close friends, workers, and people like that. Some of them did end up converting because they knew him, they trusted him, they heard it, and they were like, yes, this, right? Like, yes, this is true, this is God, this is great. However, there were a lot of people that mocked him. There were people putting him down, teasing him, calling him crazy, saying he's making this stuff up. But the majority of the Meccan society overall didn't really care one way or the other. There weren't too many strong reactions in either direction when this first started going on. Over time, the revelations and their subsequent commands from God became more specific, clarifying of one of the central tenets of Islam, which is Tawhid, or the oneness of God. So, going back to what we started with, remember that this is an area with a lot of polytheism and a lot of pilgrims that come through. That is how this city, this is how this whole area and these tribes make their money. Yes, it's through trade, but a huge chunk of that money comes from these polytheists and all of the people flocking to pray to all of the idols and things that are there. So when you have a group that is now becoming prominent from within, that is saying that there is only one God, there's only Allah, one God, the God, and we don't pray to anybody else, that is going to start getting some emotional reactions from people, because this is now their money and their life on the line here. And that is what starts to happen. So Muhammad began to condemn idol worship, and he emphasized that Allah, the God, is the only God, right? Which denied the existence of dozens of other deities that the Meccans worshipped. With this new threat to their economic system that had enriched so many of the Quraysh prominent leaders across the Meccan society, they demanded that the Prophet Muhammad and the Islamic teachings be stopped so that they could keep their political power. Let's see. Let me see. Question. When the Prophet Muhammad initially started getting revelations and people near him started following his messages, is the word conversion applicable at this early stage? It is. It is. I would say conversion, yes, because they're following, even though they didn't have as much, right? They only had like a few revelations to go off of. regardless, they're saying that whatever I was following previously is not what I'm going to follow now. I'm going to follow the Prophet Muhammad and the teachings that he is being given, even if it is only a few of them, right? So that would be conversion at that time. I do understand what you're saying though, in that like they didn't have everything set like nice and neatly yet, right? Like the specific prayers and all of the laws and the rules and all of these things. But even if it's just like a spark, even if it's just like a little bit of information, right? It's still something where they're saying, yes, I trust you, I believe you, and I'm going to follow you. So there's that sort of conversion from whatever they were doing previously to this. So Abu Talib, who is his uncle, and he was the head of the Banu Hashim clan, he protected Muhammad. And so this this gave him sort of like a safety net here. Very lucky for him, because as we're going to see here in a minute, some of the lower class Muslims did not have the same protections. And that's how you started to get some of the early martyrs of Islam, unfortunately. So his uncle was like, I'm in charge here. You know, I'm protecting him. Nobody touches him. So with this protection, no direct harm could come to Muhammad, as the other tribes risked retribution if they were to attack a member of the Banu Hashim clan. The first martyr of Islam is who we're going to talk about really quick here. Sumaya bint Kayat. So she was a woman. She's a Black woman. She was a freed slave. I love this. The story with Khadija and the Prophet Muhammad sort of changes this whole idea of like marriage, who proposes first, all of that. The first martyr of Islam, which the idea of martyrs is depressing, but since there are martyrs, the first martyr being a freed Black woman, again, really shows you what kind of people were being drawn to Islam. And we're going to get into why that is true, right? Like, why were these the people that were really getting into Islam? So she was a Black woman from Abyssinia, and she was a freed slave. She was very respected in the area. She became one of the first 7 people to convert to Islam, along with Khadija and Abu Bakr. Her family, including her husband Yasir and her 2 sons Omar and Abdullah, they also converted to Islam as well. Because of their status as freed slaves, this also meant that they did not have a clan or an owner of sorts, slave master, to protect them. So they were freed, but they were not in any sort of in crowd. They didn't have a clan. They didn't have like people that were like always watching over them. Because of that, they were left vulnerable to the anger of those people that wish they could attack the Muslims for sort of changing the way that things were going in Mecca. So because of this, Sumaya was threatened and subsequently tortured by Abu Jahl, who demanded that she renounce Islam. During these torture sessions, it was reported that she would yell out, "One, one," affirming the oneness of God. Ultimately, though, Sumaya was killed by Amir ibn Hisham, attacked her and stabbed her to death. Upon her death, she became the first martyr in Islam, followed shortly by her husband Yasir, who was also killed by one of the Quraysh. So very heavy stuff, even from the beginning. There's a lot of struggle at the beginning of Islam, but it is interesting to see that some of the people that were risking their lives were sort of like the people that are not considered high up on these social ladders, right? That really speaks to the core values of Islam, which we're about to get into. So for 5 years, the Muslims in Mecca continued to endure increasing terror, torture, violence directed at them, particularly those who are lower class, because they didn't have the protections, right? In 619, though, this is what was known as the Year of Sorrows. This is when the Prophet Muhammad lost Abu Talib, his uncle, who was also his protector, and he lost Khadija. She died as well. So the two most important people to him that he had left died. Now it's just him, right? And because of this, he lost his protection, and it gets really complicated from there. This is how in 622, things are still continuing to be kind of crazy. This is where he had that migration to Medina, known as the Hijra. So the Muslims flee to Medina. Fun fact, the people who open their arms to the Muslims in Medina, a lot of them were actually indigenous polytheists. We go now. Okay, walaikum salam. Thank you. I will be sure to post this video. Thank you for being here. Okay, so yes, the people in Medina were some of the indigenous people, including some of the pagans, the polytheists that were there. They became known as the Ansar, or the helpers. So the Muslims are now refugees here. And the good news was that they were actually able to sort of like mix together, and they actually created what was known as the Constitution of Medina. This is written between 622 and 624, drafted by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on his arrival to Medina. It established that 19 tribes, including the group of Muslim Quraysh refugees, would protect each other. So they said, okay, we're all going to come together, we're all going to work together, we're all going to protect each other. It was built on the idea of community, diverse groups living under the divine sovereign of one God. In addition to protecting the religious freedoms of non-Muslims, it also stated that these groups had the same political and cultural rights as Muslims. So it says, you open your arms to us, we're all going to work together, and I want to make sure that we're all being treated fairly, but that we're also all protecting each other. This is a big deal, because doing that even in the modern world is very difficult. People aren't always the best at coming together, differences aside. All right, so despite this alliance, while they were safe in Medina, they were not safe once you left, right? And this is an area that is mostly built on trade, which means that people are having to come and go all the time. And if you are like on a trade route, you are still not safe. So there were these constant attacks from Mecca for travelers and pilgrims alike. And this is what led the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to become a military leader. So throughout the Quran and in Hadith, you're going to see these references to like military battles. You're going to see like talking about prisoners of war, fighting, all of these things. And this is one of those times when we have to remind ourselves, I know I say this in our videos all the time, but context matters. Context is very important here. So one of the ones that I see people bring up all the time is that whole hadith I've seen of like, if someone converts out of Islam, then they should be killed, right? That was during this wartime when this stuff was said. And as someone who, if you guys live in an area that has a lot of fighting going on, I work in a very like high violence area. A lot of gang violence, like drugs, weapons, all of that, where I work and near where I live. And I can tell you that when you're in an area like that and there's all of this like who's who going on, one of the things that they stress is this like cohesion of a group, right? Like we're a group, we stay together, we look out for each other. And if you are in this kind of persecution and this warring, what happens is that if someone leaves your group, they now have all of the information on all of your people, right? So if someone leaves, they're now this sort of danger to you, your family, whoever that is, because now they can go tell the other people what your next moves are, where you guys are, like how are you doing, all those things. And that's where you're going to see some of these more like military type phrases being used in the Quran about battle, or maybe in some hadith that might be considered authentic hadith was going to be during this like time of conflict here. Important to remember the context. So in 628, the Muslims attempted to perform a Hajj in Mecca, but they were stopped at the border. They drew up a treaty with the Meccans that were there, but when the time came for them to do the Hajj, they were attacked. The treaty was thrown out like it never happened. And finally, in 632, led by Muhammad, the Meccans successfully arrived in Mecca for Hajj. They defeated the Quraysh and declared immunity for those that had engaged in the battle against the Muslims. Another interesting thing there that they're like, hey guys, we won. Also, we want peace. That is honestly something very rare. And again, this is really speaking to those Islamic values here. When a people have a military takeover of a place, it's very rare that they say, you guys are forgiven, we're not going to punish you guys. It's way more common to see people take over a place and then be like, we're in charge, like harsh authoritarian, like rule. After they won, they were trying to settle like peace in the area, which was amazing. Yeah, and then finally in 632, so a few years later, the Prophet Muhammad fell ill and he did pass away. So we just covered pretty fast. There's a lot of information, but we just covered pretty fast from the Prophet Muhammad's birth all the way through that. I do have a little timeline here. If you guys get the notes, I've marked mine up, but this is a little timeline. If you guys go and get the notes for yourself, that is included in there as well. So we went from 570, him being born, 610, received his first revelation, 619 was that year of sorrow, 622, immigration from Mecca to Medina, and then 632 was the first official Hajj, and then the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Covered all that. Here we go. What does all this have to say about Islamic values? That is the next section we're going to go over. What are Islamic values? So if you go up to anybody nowadays, anybody who's been raised Muslim or you spent time studying with Muslim, like at a masjid, a community center, a university, they're going to be teaching you things like the 5 pillars of Islam, hadith and sunnah, you know, what was said, what they did, listening to khutbahs by the different experts there. Unfortunately, they're not going to talk a lot about what it means to be a Muslim on the inside, like the values, the things you carry with yourself. You see in a lot of the videos that I talk about, you're often going to see this like checklist. I call it like the Muslim checklist, right? Like, well, if I can do all these things, check, 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 I'm a good Muslim. Now, those things are important. Those things are traditions and cultural, you know, things, ways we celebrate, where we've come from, or things that we know that we can all share as Muslims. But it doesn't really work like that either, because when we read the Quran and we look at things like the Hadith Qudsi, where it talks about what Allah cares about, Allah is looking to our hearts. He's looking to our intentions, not just the deeds themselves. He's looking to who are we? Why are we doing what we're doing? What kind of good are we doing in the world? These Muslim checklists also make it a little complicated if you can't fit into that checklist, right? This is where we get into sort of like the non-traditional types of people, whether that is like queer Muslims, right? Or just people who have disabilities, anything like that that makes it so you can't do certain things. For example, I have a disability. It is Ramadan. Even my Muslim doctor told me I can't fast. So here we are in Ramadan, and everybody's like, well, one of the 5 pillars is fasting during Ramadan. And I'm like, not for me. So, of course, there are other ways to fast other than just food. Also, there's the whole concept of giving food to the poor during this time or volunteering time. There are other things you can do. But when you do put up a checklist like that, if somebody can't check it off, then it feels a little odd, right? That is why it is important to understand what are the actual core values of Islam. How can you live Islam even if you can't do a little checklist? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about here. So yes, there are the 5 pillars of Islam, the ones that you're always going to hear. So the Shahada, which is the proclamation of faith, La ilaha illallah. The prayer, right? Salah prayers, the 5 times a day, or some people group it into the 3 times a day. But those salah prayers, those ritualistic prayers each day, again, unless you are assigned female at birth and you're on your period, and now you don't pray, again, we're kind of can't always do that perfect checklist, right? Zakat, for those who can afford it, being able to give money or time or food, something charitable back to the world, right? Very important. Number 4, fasting. Not everybody can fast, but if you can, the tradition of fasting during Ramadan to remind us of those who can't eat, the poor, also just doing like a cleanse, focusing on your spirituality, not the world, right? Not the physical world that we're in, but on the internal and the spiritual. And finally, number 5, the pilgrimage to Mecca. So for those who can afford it and those who are able to go, it is considered a requirement for Muslims to go to Mecca. However, again, speaking about LGBTQ Muslims, we currently live in a time where places like that are very dangerous for queer Muslims, which can be another barrier to sort of doing that, because you want to go, of course, but you also have to weigh like your safety, unfortunately. So as we go into these, we're going to go over 9 core Islamic values, which is going to also include the Maqasid al-Sharia. So the Maqasid al-Sharia, which translates to purpose or objective of the way, purpose or objective of the way. It's commonly used by Muslim scholars, talking about wisdom, divine intentions, moral concepts behind various scholarly rulings. Really, the whole point of it is just, are we being just? Are we really trying to rule in a way that is going to connect us to these core values, core points? So let's see, what do we got? If we use the Maqasid al-Sharia to understand Islam, we're talking about like a holistic, intersectional way to view it. And really, it consists of these 5 major points. So the first one is going to be the protection of life, or nafs, the protection of faith, deen, the protection of intellect, or aql, the protection of the lineage, nasab, and the protection of property, ma'al. So protecting those different parts of a person's life, very important. I did download sort of like a summary and a little lesson that goes through all of this from the Institute of Islamic Thought. So if you want to write that down, that's a great place to go to get more information on this Institute of Islamic Thought. It gives an example when you're reading through those documents, just to see how this works. It talks about how stealing, there's like the whole like strict laws against stealing. However, when it was weighed against some of these core values, it was found that if you're stealing bread during a time of famine, it's not punishable because you're doing it for you have no choice kind of thing. You're just trying to take care of yourself, your family, or whatever. And so if you are doing certain things, punishing someone for that would be considered inhumane for obvious reasons. So that was interesting to sort of look through and see that. So within these 5 little sections, I'll go over this super quick. When it talks about the protection of the faith or the deen, it's talking about things like religious tolerance, mutual care, freedom of religion and belief. Protection of life is like spiritual and emotional well-being. dignity for all, mental peace and happiness. Protection of the intellect is going to be freedom of expression, right to education, and freedom of consciousness. Protection of the lineage is going to be the protections for children, emotional well-being of children, and healthy environment to raise children in. And then finally, number 5, the protection of wealth is going to be the right to preserve wealth through lawful livelihood and trades, prohibition of theft, and eradication of poverty. So obviously hearing those, that sounds awesome. And you're like, yes, that is what we want to do, right? We're going to break that down a little more. So we also want to look at some of these like core values that we're going to run into in our daily lives. You're going to see some of these throughout the Quran as we're reading them. I do notice that when I talk to progressive Muslims that are especially like or reverts, it's often that they read the Quran and they found it to be so beautiful, so inspiring, so like moving. They're like, this is such a like a caring thing. And then they'll run into Muslims sometimes that will confuse them because they're like, I thought, did we read the same book? You know, so we're supposed to be here for all of these, like caring about people. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So the first one is the la ikraha fi al-din. So that is that whole idea that there's no compulsion in religion. You've probably heard that multiple times. There's no compulsion in religion. This is the idea that truth stands out from falsehood, like it says in the Quran. Nobody is obligated to become a Muslim. Nobody is obligated to stay a Muslim. We are given the freedom. That's kind of the whole point of our life, right? Is that Allah is here to test us, to show us things. And everybody is on a different path. We've all had different experiences. We have all had different lives, right? And so there's no compulsion in religion. We all have individual free will to make our own choices. You can't be forcing people into things, right? So you can't compel another individual to become a Muslim, and you also can't punish someone who chooses to leave Islam. We have bodily autonomy, reproductive autonomy, gender presentation, and all of that, right? And that's what's right here in this concept. And that if you want to go check it out in the Quran, you're going to see that in Surah 2, Ayah 256. There's no compulsion in religion. Next core value we want to talk about is Hurma, which is going to be talking about the human body, the sanctity of the human body. So this is an ancient Arabic term signifying the sacred inviolability of the human body, extending to the physical, social, emotional safety of individuals. It's supported by multiple Quranic verses. And it's also talked about within some hadith, including from Sahih Bukhari. You see it where he says, verily Allah the Exalted has made sacred your lives, your wealth, and your honor, except by right of justice, just as your day, your city, and your month are sacred. Have I not delivered the message? Islam prohibits bodily harm, humiliation, disfigurement of any kind, including rape, sexual abuse, gender-based violence, harassment, and female genital mutilation, among many others. So throughout the Quran and Hadith, we're going to see that whole, like, don't be hurting people. People have dignity. People have the right to their bodies. That's very important to remember as well. The next one, speaking of human dignity, is Karam al-Insan. So this is going to be human dignity. This is talked about in the Quran, Surah 17, Ayah 70, where it says, dignified the children of Adam. So we're talking about that humans, right, were created, as we know, in a way that's very different than like any other animal here on Earth. We have this miraculous like body and mind and spirit, right? Quran, Surah 17, Ayah 70 says, and we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea and provided for them the good things and preferred them over much of what we have created with definite preference. So we can infer as we read these things about the sacredness of humans. We can infer that things like torture, insults, humiliation, discrimination, extremism, these are all prohibited in Islam. We should never look to another human being, another creation of Allah, and think like, wow, they are the worst. Wow, I should attack them or beat them or hurt them or control them. Like, every single human is on the same like level here until, of course, Allah makes that judgment. We don't make that judgment. Allah does. We should never think that we are in a position to look at another human being who is made the same as us and pass some kind of judgment on them, right? So the next core value I want to talk about here is Rahma, which is compassion. You can see this in the name of Allah. The most common names we use for Allah are Al-Rahman, Al-Rahim, right? The most compassionate, most merciful, the giver of mercy, the giver of compassion here, right? So you can see this throughout the Quran. For example, Quran Surah 2, Ayah 273, those who spend their wealth by night and day, secretly and publicly, will have their reward with their Lord. Hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari says, whoever relieves a Muslim of a worldly grief, Allah will relieve him of one grief on the day of judgment. Whoever makes things easy for a person in difficulty, Allah will make things easy for him in this world and the hereafter. So the better you are to people, the better Allah will be to you. As Muslims, we're tasked with taking care of Rahmah that God has put on this earth, applying it to our treatment of ourselves, others, social and political, economic systems, etc. There's a section in Hadith Qudsi. I actually have my book over here. There's a section in Hadith Qudsi which talks about how one of the things that Allah had said was that someone who was brought to judgment, he said, why didn't you feed me? Why didn't you care for me? Why didn't you all this? And the person says, what are you talking about? Like, you're God. How could I feed you? How could I care for you? And he says, whenever you saw one of my people in need and you didn't care for them, you weren't caring for me. And I loved that. See, I was actually raised in the Catholic Church. I was brought up in the Catholic Church. And there was this beautiful phrase that they had during one of the songs. And it was from a sermon that Jesus had given, which is very similar to that Hadith Qudsi there, where he said, whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. So what we're saying here is that Allah made everybody. Allah put that breath of God in humanity, right? Allah sees us all as his creation. And if you are put in a position on your path where there is someone in front of you that needs help, we always hear that term, inshallah, right? Inshallah. It will happen if it's meant to happen. If you were put there and that person needed you, it is meant to happen, and you're the one that's supposed to be there to help, right? So I love that. I love that concept. There's also one other, saved another one down here. Where was it? But yes, there's another hadith here. O Messenger of God, will we be rewarded for being compassionate to animals? He said, yes, there's a reward for showing goodness and compassion to every living creature. Circling back to your question, because I have so many things I want to go over for that, but we're going to wait a few weeks. But circling back to your question, I want to add one more thing, right? I am of the belief, personally, this is just one of the interpretations that I follow. I am of the belief, right, when it comes to these core values, that the Quran itself is actually a test from Allah. What I mean by that is, when you are handed the Quran and you read it, you'll see things like that, things that might not sit right. After every single one of those, it says, but it would be better if you didn't. If somebody kills someone in Islam, for example, it is said that you may kill them in return, right? Just them, just one. We don't get to go massacre like a whole town or something, right? Oh, okay, let's see. Salam. Ramadan Mubarak, I hope. Sorry. No, this is running kind of long. We're getting there though. But I see those parts of the Quran, right? So it's saying like you can totally understand why you would do that, but it does say it would be better to forgive, or it would be better to choose peace, or it would be better to do this other thing instead. When I read that, when I have studied the Quran, I look at it and I say, this is a test. The Quran itself is giving us a test. It's saying, if Allah gives you the free will to do these two things, says you could do this, but you could do this, and this one's better. Which one? Which one are you going to pick? There's this. Speaking of the spiritual versus the like heart versus like the intellectual mindset, right? You guys might have heard me say this in a previous video if you've seen all my videos, but it's called the tomato of wisdom. And the way that that goes is that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put a tomato in a fruit salad. And I know that sounds silly, but that's what it is here. Is like you can have all the knowledge, you can have the whole Quran memorized, and you can have all of the knowledge in the whole world. But if you don't know how to actually take it and apply it to each situation and weigh all the different parts of every situation, because the context and who is in this situation, why are you in this situation? And if you can't do that, the knowledge doesn't really serve you at that point. It's just a bunch of equations. You're just trying to pop something into an equation and get an answer. But the world is so much more complicated than that. You can't just, use the same trick for everything. And I think that's where that wisdom comes in there, is understanding that, like what we just saw when I talked about like the stealing bread versus in a time of famine, right? It's like you got to take everything into consideration. The next core thing I want to talk about here is ijtihad. So ijtihad is the independent interpretation. So this is something that is not talked about as often in mainstream Islam anymore, because unfortunately a lot of scholars or sheikhs, imams, they want to hold power, right? And what happens with that is that they basically say, if you do not have this long list of credentials, you don't speak or read fluent Arabic or any of these other things, you don't really have the right to interpret Islam. Of course, that's crazy. Because the Quran and Islam is supposed to be for all people, right? I love pointing out again that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was illiterate, and he couldn't read or write. So that should be a requirement on a person to be able to interpret that. Again, not saying that we're all, as holy or as amazing as, the prophets, peace be upon them, but that, they're humans. And if Allah can trust, people who are flawed or people who have whatever, we shouldn't have to like force some kind of strange standard on people. When you look at the earliest Muslims, right, they didn't have a Muslim college that they went to get this stuff, right? They're learning from each other, and that's important as well. So understanding that the fact that Islam, it's not a hierarchical religion. It's not supposed to have a hierarchy here. Again, I was raised in the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church, you want forgiveness from God, you have to go through a priest. You got to go talk to him. He's got to ask for you to get permission to be forgiven. Islam doesn't have that. Islam is a direct connection between you and Allah, right? So it's between you and Allah. Like there's like hadith and Quran verses that say, there's nothing that severs a person's connection from Allah. He's there all the time. He's closer to us than we think. He sees all of our tears. He knows everything that has happened to us. We don't have to go through someone else, right? So ijtihad should be accessible and practiced by all. It's really focusing on this like compassionate traditional way of understanding Islam, because the earliest Muslims, again, like they didn't have universities and certificates, right? We're supposed to be learning from each other, and most of all, learning from Allah, learning from God. If you look at the, I'll write it down for myself. I really hope I wrote it down for myself. It's somewhere in here. There's that Quran verse that talks about how the Quran was sent in their language, right? Not because, Arabic is the language of God, right? Allah can speak any language. Allah is the creator of all language. But that the Quran was sent to the Arabs in their language so that they might understand. That's said throughout the Quran as well. It was sent in your language so that you might understand, or Allah sent prophets from different groups, and it would be in their language so that they would understand. One of the joys about living in the modern world is that we have translators. We have, thousands of translators. We have people that can go in, get that all translated into your language so that you can understand it. This isn't like the old medieval Catholic Church. We're not having to listen to a Latin sermon and nobody knows Latin, right? It's important to preserve the Quran and everything in the original Arabic to make sure that it's never changed, right? It's important to understand that the prayers, when we're all doing the prayers together, that they are the exact same, that they've always been. Every Muslim around the world is praying the same prayer. That's amazing. But if we're talking about understanding and we're talking about learning, you should learn in your language, right? So go find those translated versions, read the Quran in your language, and try to understand it the best you can. That is your right as a Muslim. That is what Allah wants, is for you to have that personal relationship with God, you to get that knowledge as well. See. Oh, bye y'all. Sorry, I know we're running super late. If you have to go, that's totally fine. I will be posting this video. Happy to have you here. Ramadan Mubarak. All right, moving on. After ijtihad, I want to talk about athbata al-adl, which is justice. So al-adl, the just, is one of the names of Allah. And I talked about that one a little bit in a previous video. I love that name. There's this wonderful book. Actually, let me show you guys. The Book of Language. If you guys haven't read or seen this book, it's beautiful. I actually marked the section that talks about al-adl. So it says the just is one of the beautiful names of Allah. At the heart of Islamic understanding is the Quranic verse, and the word of your Lord is fulfilled and perfected in truth and in justice, from Surah 6, Ayah 115, right? Goes on to say that, in other words, we are not to allow subjective opinion to influence our sense of justice. I love that. We all have our own views, opinions, beliefs, cultures, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, Allah, throughout the Quran, throughout Islam, asks that we care about justice, asks that we care about other people, that we do our best with whatever we're given, that we give to others. Whatever it is that Allah gave us, He gave it to us to give to others. And so we really got to focus on that justice here. Not justice because we want to be better than someone. I hate that whole concept of like, I'm better than you. I talked about that in a previous video, literally like the words of the shaitan, right? Like, I'm not going to bow down. I am better than them. Hate that idea. But instead understanding that every human has the right to be treated justly. It is our job to make sure that we are following that. So the universality of this concept also means that we as Muslims are not only required to pursue justice, but that we have an obligation to stand up in the face of injustice that others are subjected to, right? If you're given wealth, you're supposed to give it to other people, right? If you're given freedom, use that freedom to help free others. For example, I'm here, I live in the West, I've got freedom of speech. And so it's my job to be out here and use as much freedom of speech as I can, as we can, to help people who don't have it. Two more. So we have KIST, which is fairness. Fairness and the practical application is the concept of universal principle of justice. So it entails a sense of fairness and equality in the practical distribution of love, resources, land, peace, and wealth, which again, all through the Quran. I apologize, guys. I'm still getting over this cold.
Allah gave you the cold. No apologies, my dear.
Yep. Thank you. Inshallah, everything happens as it's supposed to. All right. The last one here is public benefits. So again, when Islam came to the area, this is a time when they would Ramadan Mubarak. Bye. Thank you so much. Glad you were here. So public benefits. When Islam first came into sort of like this existence here, the area that it was in, again, highly, highly misogynistic. They were known for actually killing baby girls. Like if you were born a girl and they didn't want you, they would just kill you. That was a common practice at the time. It's not the only place in the world we've seen this happen, but it was happening when Islam first, came to life there. Also, like we were talking about the slaves, I mean, like bad mistreatment of slaves. I mean, having slaves in the first place is awful, period, whatever. But let's say, like, if you look across the world and you look at the way people are treating, like, their enslaved people, like, bad. This area was violent, horrible to those people, which was terrible. So one of the things that Islam came in and did is said, hey guys, women have rights. Slaves have rights. Every human being has rights. In fact, animals have rights, right? All of these things were just all about the public benefits, people helping each other, very important. So there are three conditions that fulfill for this. Those have to be that the conditions as we're setting up public benefits have to be rational, have to have the goal here of being part of the Sharia, and they have to be to avert harm rather than fulfilling personal desires. So those are the three things here when they're looking at how to create public benefits. It has to be part of the Sharia, has to be rational, right? But it also has to try to avert harm rather than fulfilling personal desires. Make sure that is in your head there, right? So you always got to make sure we got to check ourselves, because everybody comes in with their own bias. We all come in with our own culture. We've been told certain things. I absolutely love hearing that there are so many people on this call right now, on this class, that come from so many different backgrounds, right? Because we all got to like come together, learn from each other, hear from each other. So we've got like two more little sections here that are going to go a little faster than those last ones. And then we will be open for a little discussion here at the end. We're almost done. Here we go. So lesson 4 section in here is for human rights and Islam. We were talking about this earlier. Human rights are understood by the international community, like the United Nations here. They say that it is, quote, rights that are inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. In Islam, however, Muslims see this as being rights that are bestowed by God. They're there to apply to every single individual on earth, regardless of religious affiliation, race, or language. Muslim or non-Muslim, they have the right to amend or nobody has the right to amend or withdraw these rights from other people. Excuse me. So those are things that like Allah has given us, and we have to really focus on upholding for everybody involved at all times. When we look at this, the concept of Tawhid, sorry, so tired. Tawhid, as we learned previously, this is the assertion that there is one God and that they are the only God, right? So when we talk about Tawhid, We're saying that this isn't just monotheism. This is the idea that God is the only judge, period. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I feel like I say it in every single video. Like, along with context, the idea that Allah is the only judge is like key to all of this. Anytime you hear somebody claiming to know what God is going to judge, that is wild to me personally. I do not understand that mentality.
There's
But
so
being able to
much of that in our community.
yes,
There's so much of that in our community, like the mean aunties and just like everywhere's just like, oh, that's haram. You know, the haram police.
the haram
Haram,
police.
haram, haram. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, chill.
Yes, we need to spend more time on ourselves, focusing on our spiritual development and just being a good person. That really needs to be our everyday goal. Yes, the haram police and the just the judgment of others. I mean, go into any comment section on any of the videos I've done. You're gonna see them. The whole like this is evil, this is the shaitan, this is the Allah's gonna judge you, and I'm like, yes, Allah judges us all. Um, but there's actually another hadith qudsi that I really loved on that. I brought up in a previous video too, where it says like if someone claims that Allah isn't going to forgive somebody, Allah automatically forgives that person. And that's because nobody should be coming out and claiming to be the judge of somebody else. That's completely Allah's job. In fact, I was asked a really difficult one, what I guess they thought was going to be a very difficult question for me recently, given all of the like hate and anger and the political polarization that's going on, right? I had somebody come up to me and go, well, you can understand, why people might be judgy. I mean, how would you feel if Allah forgave Trump? And I just looked at him and I was like, that's not up to me. I would just have to shrug and go, okay, maybe Allah sees something that I don't, right? Allah knows everybody better than I could ever know another person, right? So, which one? The Hadith Qudsi about the judging other people one? Is that the one you need? Yes. Okay. Really quick. Here's the book. 40 Hadith Qudsi. This is one of the only English versions of Hadith Qudsi that was put together. This one was, let me get really close so you can see like the names of everybody, Okay, so this one is one of the only English translations of Hadith Qudsi, and the only ones that were put in here are the ones that are considered to be the most authentic of the Hadith Qudsi. And it says over here, let's see, yeah. So it says, it's got the chain of narration, and then it says, a man said, by Allah, Allah will not forgive so-and-so. At this, Allah the Almighty said, who is he who swears by me that I will not forgive so-and-so? Verily, I have forgiven so-and-so and have nullified your own good deeds. I think that's hilariously I love it. Not because I want anybody's deeds to be like non-forgiven or whatever, or unforgiven, I like the idea that maybe everybody can be.
That's like the class tattletale.
It really is. It really is. It's really funny. So I saw that one, it just made me laugh because I was like, that's literally like the ridiculous level that we see online where people are like, yeah, well, you're going to hell. And I love the idea that Allah's like, ha ha ha, instantly forgiven. It's really funny to me. I believe Allah does have a sense of humor, in my opinion. But it was this idea that really got me started with progressive Islam, because when you first become a Muslim, as you guys said, there aren't really as many progressive Muslims. They're not as easy to find, right, as some of the more orthodox ones. So a lot of times you end up just like walking into this and going, well, I guess I got to do all this orthodox stuff, like if that's what it is to serve God. And then you start going like, this doesn't seem necessarily true. And I remember feeling really sad, looking out at the world, looking out at the anger and the judgment and all of this, because I'd come from the Catholic Church, which is all about the guilt, all about that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously a history of violence, just like any other faith. The Crusades, Spanish Inquisition, just like any of those like Christian world anger things. And I'm seeing it over here too. And I was just very sad. But the thought that occurred to me that really started me to focus on progressive Islam, other than the fact that I read the Quran and felt that it was very progressive, was when I looked out at the world and I just said, well, Allah can make any choice. Allah could choose to not forgive anyone, honestly. And then I paused and I went, Allah could choose to forgive everyone. And I looked out and I said, what if Allah loves everyone? What if Allah loves everyone? How could you ever look at another person and not see that Allah could love them dearly? Even if you don't, even if like you don't understand them, or they're cruel to you, or you look at them and you're like, yikes, Allah put them there. Allah made them, and what if Allah's looking for an excuse to forgive every single person? We need to do that too. Here's another little like piece of wisdom, and then we're going to finish up this last section. But another little piece of wisdom that I get on sometimes is like the fact that humans are the ones that mess everything up, right? Allah put enough food, water, help, shelter. Allah put doctors, all of these people on earth, all of the food we need, everything we could ever need. It's humans that stop people from getting the things they need. It's humans that kill each other. It's humans that are doing all this stuff. So like just remembering that like Allah is trying to give us everything we possibly need, right? And there's some hadith, I'll go find those later, but that say how there's like a solution to every problem, right? Allah has planted a solution to every problem here in the world. So trying to remember that, the world can seem like very chaotic and evil and scary, but like there's always more good than bad if we just remember to like look for it. It is there. Okay, so where were we? Okay. The social and political, so here we were talking about this like inequality going on here. So the social and political system of Mecca at the time of the Prophet, as we learned about, was deeply unequal, severe limitations on the right of marginalized individuals, especially those from minority groups, slaves, women, queer people, etc. According to Islamic history, so here I want to talk about like the treatment of slaves. So some of the earliest Muslims were either slaves or freed slaves. They saw in Islam like this concept of like equality, equal treatment, caring for people, and they were like, thank you, somebody is finally trying to do that. So according to Islamic history, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who was a slave master, would whip Bilal in public, wrap him in a cow's hide, chaining him up, leaving him to suffer under the hot desert sun as punishment for his conversion to Islam. If that tells you anything about the treatment here. So Bilal's story demonstrates of how social injustices and human rights violations that Muslims were subjected to would impact how they would later develop a society that they were creating from the ground up, a society that was rooted in equality and justice. So again, some of the verses in the Quran or sections of the Quran might be talking about things that we have already outgrown as people, and that's awesome. At the time, they were still dealing with some of that stuff. Islam was in here to try to get us out of that. It was there to be like, hey guys, maybe don't do that. Let's try to be as good as we can to the people around us. I think before we do anything, that whole golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have Allah do unto you, right? Because like Allah's going to judge us based on how we are with other people. If you want mercy, you got to show it. I love that. Medina became a non-hierarchical community state as opposed to the political state of Mecca. Societal relationships and identity were instead built around religious affiliations as enshrined in the Constitution of Medina. The Jews and Christians of Medina were subjected to the same taxes as the Muslims. They were known as the protected ones, and human rights that they shared with the Muslims as well. And they had their rights. They were granted the rights to practice their faith, even in like a Muslim controlled land. You see this throughout history, actually. When Jews were fleeing persecution during various times of history, they would actually go to Islamic lands for things like that. I love the story of the Grand Mosque in Paris, France during World War II. So, in a more recent history, the Grand Mosque in Paris actually helped a bunch of Jews hide from the Nazis by teaching them how to pray and act like Muslims so that they could stay in the mosque and they would be safe, right? Without asking them to convert or anything, but taught them how to say, like, Assalamu alaikum, all of those things so that they could be protected. I think that's really great. Unfortunately, that isn't how the world always goes. There's still persecution in the world against like non-Muslims in Muslim lands, and I totally get that, that still happens. One of my teacher friends, she's from a Christian Arab family, and they ended up having to leave because of persecution. That does happen, but it's important to remember that if we look back at like the original seeds, the original like cultivation of Islam here, it was never supposed to be like that. If you guys go to the notes, I don't have as much time to go over everything, but there's this amazing list in here in the notes where it goes over the differences between pre-Islamic Arabia and post-Islamic Arabia. What were the laws before on this? What were they after? And you can really see where those core values come out. It's really important there. So the main ones here, core values that you can find in human rights and Islamic perspective are unity of life, justice, protection of life, religious freedom, intellect, honor and dignity, and ownership. I see some other stuff in the chat. I have to go. Want to say thank you for the wonderful lecture. I really needed to hear this to remind me how I was trying to Islam in the first place. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I hope to see you for the second lecture too. Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you for being here. We are almost done, guys. We are wrapping it up. Last section. Here we go. Now, I do want to acknowledge in this last section here, we're going to be going over what's called 1.8 billion ways, meaning there are lots of ways to be a Muslim, right? But we're also going to go over the spread of Islam. And I don't want to like sugarcoat this. Just like I've said that like slavery was a thing and it was bad and all of that. And we do have to try to move out of these things. A lot of people are going to bring up, well, Islam was spread by the sword. You've probably heard that phrase, Islam was spread by the sword. And I'm going to say about half of it was. We got to be honest with that. Power corrupts people. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You might have heard that quote too. You get into power, people are going to do some crazy things, Muslim or not. Nobody is perfect, and some people make really bad choices, and they'll do it in the name of Islam. And unfortunately, that did happen. So about half of the spread of Islam was through the sword, to be honest. The other half, though, actually came from trade, and people were just seeing the way that people were as businessmen, as owners, as like family, what they really cared about, and they were like, more of that. So we're going to go over that really quick. So today there are about 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. That means like 1 in 4 people on earth are Muslim. So it's not the number one religion as far as like numbers in the world, but it is one of the top religions in the world. It can be found on every continent, in every corner of the world. Islam is practiced as one of the most demographically diverse populations across the world. We already see this in our little group here, but Muslims from everywhere, Muslims of every culture and race and background and everything, right? Yes, center there, and its start was like in the Arabian Peninsula, but most Muslims are not Arab. Actually, less than 20% of Muslims are Arab. The most populous area in the world for Muslims is actually in Southeast Asia and in Asia, right? Indonesia is actually going to be the number one most populated like Muslim country is actually Indonesia, which most people don't think of off the bat. About 60% of the world's Muslims actually live in Asia. So there are lots of different sects within Islam. A lot of people who, either are new to Islam or like don't know that much about Muslims, they think that Islam is just like this one group of people that are all exactly the same. As we know, at the beginning of Islam, there was sort of that like break between the Sunni and the Shia, as far as like the way that they wanted to continue doing things and who they wanted to follow. So you're going to see that the ones who followed Abu Bakr, the father of Aisha, dear friend of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were the Sunnis, and then the Shias wanted it to be more like blood related. So it's going to be like the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad saying he was the rightful caliph. And then from there, it broke into even more because you have different schools of thought. The schools of thought basically just means like, how are we going to make rulings? How are we going to decide like what we're going to go by? Are all hadith, correct? Are we going to go by all the hadith? Or are we only going to go by like the ones that we think are like super, super accurate? What if they go against the Quran? What are we going to do there? It's going to break up from there. So when you see that, you're going to see 4 different schools of Sunni, main schools of Sunni thought, and about 3 different main schools of Shia. And then you're also going to see some that are like not even within Sunni or Shia. They're sort of their own thing that come off. You're also going to see Sufis, which are going to be more like the esoteric, creative types. I fall under Sufism personally. Sufis can be Sunni or Shia or neither. And one of the cool things in here as well is this awesome little map thing, Muslims of the world. It goes over some of the main groups. Might be hard to see with my light, sorry. There you go. Some of the main groups and breaks within there and their schools of thought. The final thing I wanted to say in here was that while common values and beliefs are what unite us, there are ultimately 1.8 billion Muslims on earth, meaning there are 1.8 billion ways to be a Muslim. As we learned about in this chapter, we'll review in later chapters, Islam is a deeply personal religion that teaches individuals to submit to God and to God alone. Islam exists to provide a way for those who identify as Muslims to claim their God-given human rights while ensuring those of all the communities have the same rights. So again, big shout out to the ANA Foundation and to MPV for helping create this content and for asking me to be here. That is the end of the lecture. You guys can always shoot me an email at mpvwithkendra@gmail.com or the comment section, of course, when this video comes out. Invite more people. We can have more people at our next one. I'll try to do something maybe different next time so it doesn't go for 2 full hours. Time got away from me, but we'll break the next one in half. But yeah, thank you for coming and Ramadan Mubarak. I hope you guys have a great Ramadan. Our next one will be the first Saturday of next month. I'll have more content for y'all soon, inshallah. And yeah, salam. Have a great evening or morning, wherever you are.